You know, there's something really special about developers who try to scare you or portray horror while coding for the limited 16-bit hardware. So today, we'll be taking a look at a slew of 16-bit horror games spread across multiple systems, including the Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, Amiga, MS-DOS, arcade systems. Heck, I'll even throw in the PC Engine and Game Boy Advance, because where else would I put them? So let's get started! This is Nosferatu for the Super Nintendo, a late release for the system which features some impressive production values. From the cutscenes to the animations and backgrounds, you would be forgiven for looking at this game at a glance and thinking that this might be an early 32-bit game. The game is a mix of a cinematic platformer, namely Prince of Persia, and a beat-em-up, so you'll have to navigate across the various levels with your controls being slow and pondered, but intentionally so. You'll have to solve minor puzzles, avoid traps, and pick up items and reach the end of the stage before the admittedly stingy timer runs out. While this is clearly inspired by Prince of Persia, the levels are nowhere near as large as that game, as most can be cleared within a few minutes. The challenge being that, like I said, your timer for each stage is super short. Not helped by the fact that levels have multiple paths that lead to chests with permanent health upgrades, items or crystals which increase your fighting power, but finding these can be a problem if you're starting to run low on time. Not only that, but if you're knocked out either by an enemy or by hitting a wall, you'll lose a crystal, so these can be pretty finicky. One cool thing about this game is that you've got a surprisingly high variety of attack moves, and fighting the various enemies and bosses feels more like something out of a beat-em-up than a Prince of Persia style game. I feel that the gameplay doesn't quite live up to the production values of the game, but it's still a fun romp and it makes for a very moody game during Halloween. Check it out if you can. This is Aliens by Konami for the arcades, and it follows the exact same plot of the movie. If by the same plot you mean Ripley, who is now a blonde for some reason, goes into a space colony wearing jeans and sneakers and wipes the floor with all the pink xenomorphs. What do you mean this isn't the aliens you remember? It's literally in the promotional materials. Anyway, this is a run-and-gun with Ripley picking from a slew of weapons to use against the xenomorphs. You can walk up or down as if this were a beat-em-up, and you often have to use that to your advantage, like climbing stairs to avoid taking damage and then defeating foes who are at the bottom. You'll also occasionally crawl through vents where you can't move up or down, and must now instead rely on your motion detector, which, I don't know, this thing never seemed very useful to me. And in between levels, you have an on-rail segment, where you fire at everything that moves while trying to rescue Newt. And man, this game is so cool! Sure, a lot of it doesn't make much sense within the continuity of the movies, and it's also super difficult and unfair, as arcade games tend to be. And it's also got a little bit of that Konami early arcade jank. But this is still a really cool game and an absolute must-play. Come on! This is Elvira, Mistress of the Dark for Amiga computers, and this is part point and click and part first-person RPG all wrapped into one. The The story takes place after the events of the first Elvira movie, where she now owns her uncle's castle. But an evil dark force and its monsters has captured it and imprisoned Elvira. So now it's your job to put an end to that. You have to navigate the castle, pick up any items that might be useful, either to solve puzzles, make you stronger, give to Elvira to make potions, or take out foes that cannot be defeated through combat. So far, so good. And to be fair, the visuals and audio are incredible for the time. I mean, this game came out in early 1990. For context, the Super Nintendo was still a year and a half away from being launched in the West. But the detail in the pixel art here is frankly astonishing. From Elvira's movement to Elvira's movement, to the enemy animations and the extreme amounts of gore, I am actually shocked that this game did not cause a moral panic back in the day, because wow! The problem is that this game is excessively difficult, obtuse, and cryptic. You can pick up literally hundreds of items in the game, but many of them are either red herrings which serve no purpose, or have limited use for stuff like potions, which you're probably never gonna use anyway. Not only that, but this game is filled with instant death traps that will result in a game over unless you happen to have the right item with you at the right time, and you use it on time, and in the way that the game wants you to use it. The combat is also a little too basic for its own good. Basically, the enemies either attack left or right, and you simply have to block or parry just as the animation finishes playing to not get hit. And then the tables reverse and you do the same. I know it sounds like I'm being a little too hard on this game, but I don't actually hate it. I just think that it was made for a very specific type of gamer, and the rest of us mortals will most likely need a guide on hand to play it. There's also an MS-DOS version of this game, which you can get on GOG.com, but the Amiga version is clear and away the superior port, so I recommend emulating that one instead. I should also point out that Elvira here seems pretty superfluous to the plot, almost like someone built a dark fantasy RPG adventure game hybrid and then decided to throw in Elvira at the last minute. Honestly, you could replace her with any old wizard who gave you some pointers and nothing would really change. Well, almost nothing. In the end though, this is a game that you play for the visual spectacle and not so much for the game itself, because this pixel art is something that is absolutely worth experiencing. Elvira would be followed up by Elvira 2, The Jaws of Cerberus, also for the Amiga and MS-DOS, and I feel that this game is both better and worse than the first one. This is basically the same game as the first one, but it's now set in modern times and it takes place within the recording studios of the Elvira TV show. In fact, unlike the first Elvira game, Elvira 2 seems to have built its entire world around Elvira, which in turn makes it much more interesting to explore. You also now get to pick a starting class, which will change your stats, though beware, some of them suck at physical combat. Speaking of which, combat is now much more rare. The first game kept showing random nameless soldiers at you left and right, but here it feels like you have, I don't know, maybe 12 battles throughout the entire game. So as a result, Elvira leans much more heavily towards the adventure side and not so much towards the RPG side. Not only that, but that whole mechanic where you had to predict which side the enemy would attack from is now gone. Instead, we now have more traditional dice rolls and you can aim at specific body parts to increase your hit rate, as well as use magic, with most spells being created by picking up and mixing the items that you find around the game. With the exception of the setting now being more Elvira focused, the rest of these changes can be either good or bad depending on your personal preference. But the real downfall of this game is the pixel art. I mean, it's still amazing for the time, but the violence and gore was massively scaled back. Well, I mean, it's still violent, but now it's closer to cartoon violence. You still get some cool set pieces, but you can tell that someone higher up told the artists to hold back a little bit. I mean, heck, look at the Elvira animations in the first game and now compare them to the downgraded sequel. Not to mention that the first game had different poses for Elvira, whereas here it's always the same one. This game is also available on GOG.com, but once again only the MS-DOS version. And while the DOS version isn't as far behind as the Amiga port this time, the Amiga version is still the way to go here. If you enjoyed the first game, you'll most likely enjoy this one as well. And once again, this game is a spectacle in pixel art, and I do have to admit that I prefer the art style in this game. But I just wish that someone had let the artists go all out once again. This is Scooby-Doo Mystery for the MegaDrive, and this is a point-and-click adventure game where you play as Shaggy and Scooby as you stumble onto mysteries, talk to people, collect clues, and solve crimes. And this is literally the perfect Scooby-Doo game. Why do they keep making platformers out of this property when the show is such a good fit for the point-and-click genre? You have all of the main themes from the show, the writing and characters are perfectly represented in this game, as is the show's humor. Yes, you'll go to kitchens and prepare large meals, and you even have an eat button. Now that is true evolution on the adventure genre. And if you find the ghosts, you'll have to run away from them while still referencing the show. Seriously, why is this game so good? And why is it on the Sega MegaDrive of all systems? Look, I'm a Sega guy, and if you've watched my channel before, you know I'm a Sega guy. But this should have been on PCs, not on consoles. And as a result, I often find myself struggling with the controls or taking longer to perform actions that I otherwise would have taken because the controller is simply not ideal for this sort of game. As it is though, this is a really fun game modeled after the LucasArts style of point-and-click adventure games. Not only are the menus clearly inspired by games like Monkey Island, but so is the art style. I've seen some YouTubers who sometimes complain about the art style during close-ups, and to me, that's usually a good sign that they never played Day of the Tentacle, which this game is clearly using as its basis. Add to that the fact that you can choose between two mysteries, or episodes if you prefer, and you have an adventure game that is a hidden gem for the genre, but is rarely mentioned by either Sega fans or point-and-click adventure fans. This is the right game for the wrong system, but it's absolutely worth a playthrough. This is Splatterhouse for arcades by Namco, and when people think of 16-bit horror, this is usually the series that springs to mind. You're some folks caught in a rainstorm and decide to seek shelter, which just so happens to be haunted and filled with monsters. Luckily, a mask that is similar to but legally distinct from Jason Voorhees turns you into not Jason. And now you have to go and save your girlfriend. So you'll be jumping, punching, and that's it really. Yeah. Splatterhouse is clearly style over substance, but man, what a cool style it is! You'll be chopping off monsters with cleavers, splattering them onto the walls with 2x4s, and so much more. Sure, your moveset is limited, but when a game is this much fun, does that really matter? You'll see zombies, creatures from the Black Lagoon, ghosts, poltergeists, zombie hands. Honestly, nothing about this mansion makes any sense when you actually stop to think about it. So it's pretty clear the developers just wanted to throw some cool stuff at the screen, and they were not about to let little things like continuity, logical sense, or international copyright get in their way. One interesting thing about this game is that it's filled with branching paths. Some you can pick yourself, while others you're forced into if you fall into a hole. Some of these are punishments that will make the level longer, while others simply take you towards different paths towards the same boss at the end. And oddly enough, some of these pitfalls are actually easier than the level would have been otherwise if you had not fallen in. So it's always good to experiment. And I also like how the weapons are really fun, and you're sometimes forced to choose which one you'll want to use. Most folks who are just getting into this game usually struggle with the level 3 boss, Biggie Man. But you can simply exploit the weapon pickup system and bring 2 shotguns to a chainsaw fight. Hopefully, this tip will save you some frustration. But yeah, Splatterhouse is the poster child of retro horror games during the 16-bit era, and you should absolutely check it out. Splatterhouse would also come to the PC Engine, where it suffered some pretty major cutbacks in graphics, presentation, and audio. Like for example, you now don't see the couple running into the house or the mask joining up with you. But this port retains the style where it counts. Beating up enemies or demolishing them with weapons is almost as fun here as it is in the arcades, and most of the excessive ruthlessness is here, as are all the levels, weapons, bosses, and branching paths. Heck, I actually think the music is a little better in this version, though the sound effects took a pretty major hit. It is interesting though how they recorded new lines for Jennifer. One thing I should point out though is that the US version changes the mask's design to something less likely to enrage Paramount Studios, and censors some religious themes as well, like removing this altar here, though it is funny how they still left the candles floating in mid-air. The Japanese version is the way to go here, as there's no text to begin with, but either one is fine, and the weapon exploit also works here as well. You're welcome. This is Splatterhouse 2 for the Sega Genesis or MegaDrive, and this is pretty much the same as the first game, but worse in every way. Well, I guess the music is a little better, so there's that. It's been 3 months since the first game, and you're off to rescue Jennifer yet again, who is now a blonde for some reason, and once again has a different voice actress. And man, I really want to like this game. I've tried so many times to get into Splatterhouse 2, which to be fair opens up with a really good introduction, and the first level is pretty decent. But after that, it's all downhill. Gone are the branching paths, the violence levels were massively toned down, with most of the backgrounds now being generic walls and rivers, instead of, you know, this. And most of the regular enemies look really goofy, and the weapons aren't nearly as satisfying. All of the weapons from the PC Engine version feel great to use, but here they kinda suck. Even your punches feel weaker. Though to be fair, I think that one might be a sound design issue. The worst part is that there was genuine potential here. I mean, the graphics are better than the PC Engine version from a technical standpoint, and there's times where the game approaches the heights of its predecessor. But yeah, this one just always disappointed me. But I guess Splatterhouse 2 sold pretty well, because the MegaDrive would also get Splatterhouse 3, and I feel this is a much better game. The genre has now changed to a beat 'em up, but it manages to have a lot more style than its predecessor, and it's got some pretty interesting gameplay mechanics that you do not usually see for the genre. The level of gore is better than its predecessor in my opinion, but now it's also more cartoony when compared to the first one, though I do feel that fits the mood of this game a little better. And as you defeat enemies, you'll see limbs, mouths, and heads break out of your foes, and they will literally start falling apart as you beat them up. And you know what? That is really cool and completely in line with this series. And you've got a decent assortment of moves to use against your foes, including your basic combos, weapons, grapples, and these crystals that let you become an even more buffed version of not Jason Voorhees. One interesting thing about this game is that you've got a map that lets you see where the boss is, and as you cross the level, you'll often be interrupted by various cutscenes of Jennifer or your son as they're in danger. And if that timer reaches 0 before you complete the level, then they're gone. And the cool thing is that these create branching paths in the storyline, depending on who you manage to save or if and how you lose them. The problem is that the developers know you're going to try and rush through this game to save everyone, so it often feels like this game is trying to deliberately waste your time. Like, you get knocked around fairly easily, and when you do, it takes forever for you to get up. And it's even worse if you lose a life, because then it takes even longer. Or how enemies have this annoying tendency to block your attacks, which isn't ideal when you're in a hurry. And trust me, that timer is anything but generous. It just kind of seems like the developers were a little insecure as to whether or not they gave you too much time, so they just kept making sure you'd feel every mistake as it chips away at your time. Still, I gotta say, these cutscenes are really well done, partly because they hired actual models for them, which adds an extra sense of realism and urgency to the game. In fact, these models actually pose something of a problem, because when this game re-released for the PS3 and Xbox 360 as part of the Splatterhouse remake, all of the cutscenes were redrawn. So in the end, while I don't think Splatterhouse 3 is as good as either version of Part 1, I do think that it's leaps and bounds better than Part 2, and it's well worth your time. This is Musya, the classic Japanese tale of horror. And yes, that is the official title. And it was released for the Super Nintendo. You are a soldier in medieval Japan who was the only survivor from a losing battle. As you stop by a nearby village to recover, you learn that it's beset by evil forces. And you set out for the cavern where they live in to rescue a kidnapped girl. The game is an action platformer, and visually it kind of reminds me of the Castlevania series, but it plays plays nothing like it. For one thing, I feel the enemies often take too many hits to go down. Not only that, but they're also faster than you, and your moveset is limited. Because of this, I feel Musya is excessively difficult, but not in a good way. You do get some power-ups that increase your range, and collect items that summon a random deity to help you out, which give you powers like a shield, clear the screen of enemies, or heal your admittedly large health bar. Problem is, many enemies tend to respawn, and your controls are on the stiff side, so the platforming can be pretty difficult. And as you defeat bosses, you'll pick up scrolls that create different effects, but you'll also have to pick up items that charge that scroll. And let me tell you, those are few and far between. Sadly though, I feel that this game does not quite live up to its potential, and that's a shame too, because Musya has some really interesting ideas, and the backgrounds look pretty great, even if they start repeating a few levels in. But sadly, this game is just not for me. This is Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers for MS-DOS computers, and this is, in my opinion, one of the best point-and-click adventure games ever made. You play as Gabriel Knight, a failed writer and bookstore owner who seems to be modeled after a young Conan O'Brien. And he is researching on voodoo for his next book, just as a string of voodoo murders are taking place in New Orleans. However, as you learn more about voodoo, you stumble onto more than you should. What I like about Gabriel Knight is that this was a surprisingly mature game for 1993. Not only do you have a mature approach to dialogue, characters and love scenes, but the game also delves really deep into historical voodoo, New Orleans' colonial past, and how its current traditions diverge from Haiti, all of which is told with impressive historical detail while still keeping the game interesting. Not only that, but all the characters are likable if flawed, which helps keep the tone light, but as the plot progresses, it starts becoming more and more oppressive as Gabriel begins to doubt who we can trust, not helped by the gruesome scenes of the victims and Gabriel's very own recurring nightmares. There's also a really strong element of psychological horror in this game, as you're always left wondering whether or not voodoo is real or if the culprits are simply using voodoo as a distraction. Add to that a pretty star-studded voice cast for 1993, which includes actors like Tim Curry, Mark Hamill, Michael Dorn, and Leia Remini, and you have a game with some really impressive production values for the time, which are further helped by the good pixel art and the really well-drawn comic book style backgrounds and cutscenes. And it also helps that unlike a lot of adventure games from back in the day, you'll rarely get a game over screen, and the puzzles are all logical and not overly difficult. For the most part. Because man, that clock puzzle. Gabriel Knight truly is a moody experience that is captivating, immersive, and educational, all while keeping the horror elements intact. In 2014, the game would also get a modern remake released digitally on Steam and GOG, which I can't really comment on because, well, I was part of the studio that worked on this game. Yeah, that's me right there. So it's kinda difficult for me to be impartial about it, so I'll simply say that it exists. But really, Gabriel Knight is, like I said, one of the best games in this genre, and it does so while relying on a serious plot and mature themes, and not so much on humor. So I say, check it out if you can.
I bet. Just a minute. It lives, I see. Do you want to speak with Lolita? I'm sorry, but Gabriel is a lout. Oh, I mean, he's out. Yeah, if he ever comes back, I'll tell him. You know, you could do better. I know I don't know you, but you could do better. Sure.
This is the Nightmare Before Christmas for the Game Boy Advance, and wow, did this game ever caught me by surprise. I came into this one expecting some generic platformer or maybe a beat 'em up. What I did not expect was a full-blown Metroidvania by the same studio who made Kid Icarus 2 for the Game Boy. Yes, really! You play as Jack Skellington, and the story takes place before the events of the movie, and it details how Jack first met Oogie Boogie and some of the other characters. Well, it turns out Halloween Town has been taken over by bugs, and it's your job to clear them. You do this by exploring the town or the mansions of the various residents, defeating bosses, gaining new abilities, and picking up health upgrades. And the game leans more on the Metroid side of the formula, so there are no RPG stats or leveling up like in Castlevania, and you must instead explore the world for any upgrades that might make you stronger. This includes a frog's breath gun that freezes foes, which you can then use as a platform to jump on, a bat boomerang which damages foes but can also be used to flip switches, or your dog Zero, which can teleport you to other locations provided you play a Mode 7 minigame. This is honestly a really impressive game, and it's also impressive how well they capture the feel of the movie. From Jack's overly dramatic movements to the mayor's faces and behavior changing whenever he's scared or stressed. And of course, the music, which was either taken from the movie or strongly inspired by it. Honestly, my biggest issue with this game is that the Game Boy Advance does not do a good job at doing justice to these songs, but the melodies are still good. So I say, check this one out. This is Samurai Ghost by Namco for the PC Engine, and despite its name, this is technically a sequel to Genpei Toma, which is considered a classic in the arcades and the PC Engine in Japan, but it's mostly unheard of in the West, and personally, I could never understand what I'm supposed to do in the original game. The sequel, however, seems to have been mostly ignored by everyone, which is a shame because I freaking love this game. This falls squarely into the medieval Japan style of horror, and much like Splatterhouse, which, by the way, was also created by Namco, Samurai Ghost is style over substance. You play as the titular samurai ghost who went down from the heavens to medieval Japan, and you must destroy this dude's soul. And to do that, you'll travel across Japan, though the graphics and backgrounds makes this much closer to Japan's interpretation of hell, as you cross rivers of blood and immense graveyards. The graphics are very impressive for the system, featuring detailed sprites and pretty decent animations. But really, it's the art style and the incredibly moody and immersive music and visuals that sell this title. In fact, Samurai Ghost is most likely the Japanesiest horror-themed game of its time. The controls are pretty stiff and tough to get a hang on at first, though in time you'll realize that your movements are slow and your attacks are meant to be measured and change depending on your timing and how you hold the D-pad. You also occasionally pick up a few power-ups, but these are few and far between, and this game is super difficult. But in time, once you pick up on its quirks, it becomes really addicting. I sometimes feel like I'm the only person in the world who loves Samurai Ghost, and like I said, this game is clearly style over substance, but man, it's a really good style. This is Ushio Tora for the Super Nintendo, based on a manga and anime series which I've never seen or read. As far as I can tell, you and your non-human friend are spirit hunters, and each level you have some pretty lengthy cutscenes on who the villain of the week is, before you have to go and hunt it down. Although, really, I'm using the word level very loosely here. The first level is only 3 screens long before you fight a boss, and the second stage is even shorter than that. Really, this game is more like one big boss rush mode, and it's fine, I guess. I feel your moveset is not ideal for some of these battles, but because you're just straight up jumping to each boss fight, you can kinda figure out their patterns with enough practice and take them down fairly easily. Not only that, but because there are so few destructible low-tier enemies, whenever some do appear, they'll very often drop health items. And even if you lose a life, you'll continue right where you left off with full health, while the boss retains all the damage you've inflicted. So you can usually brute force some of them if you simply can't wrap your head around their patterns. Like I said, you have 2 characters you can play as, but their differences are pretty minimal. But yeah, this game isn't bad or anything, but it didn't really do it for me. I think that it's one of those titles that was made for fans of the anime and manga only. So if you're one of those, you might enjoy this one. This is Demon's World, also known as Horror Story for arcades, and the story is that ghosts and demons have broken loose and you're this cool dude with sunglasses who has to stop them. All of the levels have forced scrolling, which means you have to keep moving and you can either gun down enemies or jump on them Super Mario style. You'll also be picking up weapon power-ups which have different firing ranges, firing power, or angles. Though my favorite is by far the spread gun. I really like how enemies can be generic ghosts or imps, but you'll also have recognizable horror icons like Frankenstein's monsters and Jason knockoffs. I also kinda dig how each level has a world theme. For example, the first stage is set in the Old West where you fight ghost cowboys, which then leads to a Native American level, before then crossing the ocean and reaching ancient Japan. The game itself is okay. Nothing spectacular or groundbreaking, but it's good enough on its own, I suppose. Horror Story would also be brought to the PC Engine CD in Japan, and it's pretty much the same game, albeit less graphically impressive. I mean, some of these backgrounds almost look closer to what you'd expect out of the NES. I mean, heck, you can even see the boss's border covering the background. One interesting thing about this version is that it begins with a level set in ancient China instead of the Old West, before then crossing over to Japan. I wonder why they changed that. Also, I'm pretty sure they nerfed the spread gun, because it went from being my favorite weapon to the worst one. And I also feel like there's really nothing here that justifies the game coming on a CD. All of this looks to be perfectly doable on a Hue card. But honestly, I did not enjoy this version nearly as much as the arcade original. So I say, stick with the coin-op version instead. This is Clocktower for the Super Nintendo, a point-and-click horror game that released fairly late into the system's life and only in Japan. You play as Jennifer. Wait, another Jennifer? What switch Japanese horror games and women named Jennifer? Anyway, you're an orphan who gets adopted by a wealthy recluse, and when you and a few other orphan kids enter the Clocktower mansion, something goes wrong, as you hear a scream and everyone goes missing. Before long, you find yourself being chased by the series' staple antagonist, the Scissor Man. Like I mentioned before, this is a point-and-click adventure game, which is usually not an ideal genre for consoles. But in this game, it honestly works really well. Your cursor is fast and controls are streamlined to the point where you can just hover over anything and the game will automatically assume the correct action. With that said though, this game is slow. Painfully slow. I know this is intentional, but geez, this is slow. You do have a sprint button, but doing so will drain your stamina, and the lower it is, the easier it is to get a game over screen. Heck, get it low enough and you'll get a game over screen from a parrot of all things. Thankfully, the art style is truly great, as are the animations, and I feel the developers did a good job at going for a more realistic art style instead of your typical anime visuals. I mean, nothing against anime, y'all already know that I'm a major weeb, but the realistic art style gives Jennifer that extra bit of realism and helplessness in the game. Speaking of which, Jennifer is completely helpless. There are no weapons in this game and no means of self-defense. And if you're ever in trouble, your only options are to either run or hide. But if you're hiding, you have to stop moving or creating any sort of noise, or else you'll be discovered. From there on, it's really a question of picking up inventory items and knowing when to use them. And depending on your actions and their order, you can get over 9 possible endings. There really isn't any other game quite like this one on any other 16-bit console, which is part of the reason why this game has such a loyal fanbase. In fact, if you mention 16-bit horror to anyone, people will usually think of the Splatterhouse series or this game. And with good reason too, because it's honestly an amazing experience. Check it out if you can. This is Waxworks for MS-DOS computers, a first-person RPG horror game by the same studio behind the Elvira games. The game would also come out for the Amiga, but unlike the Elvira games, I feel the MS-DOS and Amiga versions are so close in terms of quality that it basically comes down to personal preference. Anyway, you're visiting your uncle's wax museum when you learn that an ancient witch cast a curse on your family. So you're given a crystal ball that lets you contact your uncle from beyond the grave. And you'll be visiting multiple wax exhibits that bring you to different places in time. And you cannot leave those exhibits until you complete their quests. What's interesting here is that each exhibit plays slightly different from one another. And because of that, the game ends up having an anthology feel to it. So for example, the Ancient Egypt exhibit is the most standard first-person RPG of the group. Here, you explore the dungeon, collect weapons, armor, items, defeat enemies, cast spells, and so on. But then you have the Jack the Ripper exhibit, where you're in turn of the century England and there's no combat. So the game is now more about exploring this world and solving the mystery of Jack the Ripper, while avoiding the police and passerbys who think that you're the culprit behind the murders. While the zombie exhibit is one more focused on combat with a hint of survival horror, as you only get one weapon and you'll be hard-pressed to find any items to help you. And lastly, you also have a Cthulhu-themed Waxwork. The combat in this game is the most standard of them all when compared to the Elvira series, making it the first one that is actually easy to pick up and play. And like the second Elvira game, you can also aim at individual body parts of your foes for different effects. So if a zombie loses its arms, for example, it'll be unable to attack you. Also, the pixel art in this one is the best so far, as the artists were clearly let off their leash, and they were told they could do whatever they wanted. And boy, did they ever follow up on that. I feel the game itself is alright, but man, once again, this is a pixel art spectacle, and something which must be absolutely seen. If you don't care about Elvira or the Elvira games, this is most likely the easiest game from Horrorsoft to get into, and you probably won't need a guide nearly as much with this one. So I say, check it out if you can. This is Laplace Toma for the Super Nintendo. It's 1924 in Massachusetts, and some children have gone missing in a nearby haunted mansion. So now, you get to create your character and go find them, and you can select from a slew of character classes. After that, you visit the various spots in the city to buy gear, but also recruit new members to your party. From there on, you'll be entering the mansion and fighting monsters and spirits in a Final Fantasy-like turn-based battle system and solving puzzles. What I find it interesting here is that the game is constantly asking you to make tough decisions, starting with your party and their classes. So for example, the detective is the best one for physical combat, which is good when fighting against giant rats, ghouls or skeletons, but it'll cause 0 damage to ethereal foes like ghosts and spirits. For that, you need a medium and a dabbler, both of which can use magic to heal, damage or buff. But their mana is limited, so it's often best to enchant a detective to cause ethereal damage to these foes. But the thing is that even if you defeat them, you'll gain experience, but you won't get any money. For that, you need a journalist, who has no means of making regular attacks against either physical or non-physical foes, but can instead photograph them, which you can then sell these pictures to get money. But you can't just take pictures of any old rat and expect people to pay money for that. It's gotta be stuff like ghosts or living skeletons. But the thing is that even if you do find a good enemy to photograph, if the photo is too blurry, you won't get much money for it. And you have to do all of that while managing your character's mental health, similar to what you see in a Lovecraftian novel. Basically, if they witness too many horrors, or are too scared, or receive too much mind damage, which can come from combat or simple things like playing the piano at night in the middle of the haunted mansion, they can go insane. And if characters go insane, they cannot use their special abilities and will start attacking everyone at random. There are just so many gameplay mechanics here at play, and the fact that you have to juggle all of these while still trying to progress through the mansion makes Laplace Toma one of the most unique RPGs to have ever come out, 16-bit or otherwise. My only criticism with this game is that the graphics are a bit on the low end for the console, and the music can get pretty annoying after a gameplay session. But other than that, I absolutely recommend you check this one out. And there we go, a selection of 16-bit horror games to enjoy this Halloween. Are there any games I missed? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I'd like to thank all my Patreon supporters, including my newest backer, C.A. Brown. Thank you for helping make the channel better. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!